Today in the lab, I'm going to be making these cute little reindeer Christmas decorations from what else but soda cans. For each reindeer, you need 9 aluminum cans, and 6 of them can be in any brand or print, and then you'll want 3 cans that are red Coca-Cola cans. You need to break down and flatten all of the cans into these aluminum sheets. And if you need more information on how to do that, I have several tutorials on my YouTube channel for how I break down the cans and also several different ways that you can flatten the aluminum into sheets. So check that out if you need assistance on how to break down or flatten the aluminum cans. The other thing you need are some paper templates. And you need a rectangular piece that is 1.5 inches by 7.5 inches. And then you're going to cut 3 tapered pieces. The first taper will fit at the 1.5 inch marker and taper down to about 1 inch. Your next taper will match up with that and taper down to about 5/8 of an inch. And your last taper will match up and taper down to 1/4 of an inch. So you're going to have these 4 paper templates. So you want to cut all of your aluminum sheets, and you need, for each reindeer, you need 12 rectangular pieces, 3 of the large tapers, 3 of the medium tapers, and 2 of the small tapers. So to cut the aluminum, it's very easy. I just use a glue stick, and I'm going to put just a tiny bit of the glue stick on my sheet of aluminum, and then I'll just place my templates on there. And if you don't put too much glue on, you should be able to reuse your templates a couple of times. And then it's very easy just to trim the aluminum with a regular pair of scissors. It's a good idea if you have a little box to catch your scraps in. And then it cuts just like paper. You do want to be a little bit careful. You are working with raw metal edges. So as long as you handle the material carefully, you should be able to cut out all the sheets and not nick your fingers. So you're just going to cut all of your templates out this same way, and you'll notice that the paper should peel right off if you're careful, and you should be able to reuse the templates, like I said, so that you end up with 12 rectangular pieces, 3 of the large tapers. And I should have mentioned that all of the rectangular pieces are cut out of the on whatever print you have of can, and all of the tapered pieces are cut from the Coca-Cola cans. So you'll have 12 rectangles cut from whatever can you like, 3 large tapers cut from the Coca-Cola can, 3 medium tapers cut from the Coca-Cola can, and 2 small tapers cut from the Coca-Cola can. Once you have all of your pieces cut, you want to go ahead and tape together 6 of the rectangular pieces. And I like to use this metal tape because it's just easy to work with. It has a paper backing on it, and it's just easy to work with. And I use it on a lot of my aluminum can projects. However, if you don't have this aluminum tape, you don't need it for this project, because you do need to use some clear tape, and I just have some really inexpensive clear tape. It's pretty thin, but it's a stronger tape than the metal tape. And you need it because you're going to be rolling some of the aluminum with the printed side out. For this first piece, I'm going to roll the strips with the aluminum side out. And what I've found, because this is such a long piece and it is pretty, it fights back when you're trying to coil it up. So a couple of things that I learned is that I can't just use the silver metal tape. I do have a piece of the clear tape on the other side, and it holds the piece a little more stable anyway. So, but you don't have to tape both sides. You can tape both sides, and you can use just the clear tape if you want to for this project. I do recommend having a little bit of metal tape at the end just because it makes the final taping a little easier, and because of the way you're holding the piece, it is a little easier if you have the metal tape on the end. So I've got my 6 pieces of aluminum, the aluminum rectangle shapes taped together, and I'm going to take the end that I don't have the extra piece of tape on, and I want to just coil it around a little wooden skewer to get my coil started. Now I want to keep it as straight and even as possible because I want my metal to roll evenly. If you've seen some of my other bead rolling tutorials, you know that I love the Green Creativity bead roller, and I do recommend that if you've never rolled beads from the aluminum before, but it's not large enough for this project. You want to use a lot of caution with this step. I'm a little embarrassed to show you this, but I made my own bead roller. It's just got a cotter pin, so you do want a fairly large bead roller that you can fit this whole strip onto, and you can find them on Amazon. You can certainly buy them with wooden handles and a little nicer looking than mine here, but this does work. So you want to make sure your coil is tight enough for your bead roller to grip and hold the metal as you turn it. Now this is the part where you want to be extremely careful, because as you're rolling this, you are probably going to feel a little bit of fatigue in your hands, and you don't want this to slip away from you because it does have metal edges, and if you get hit by the edge the wrong way, you could definitely get a paper cut or something. So just to show you what I'm talking about, I only have half of the first piece of metal rolled, but if I let go of it, it definitely kind of whips around and wants to open up. So the farther along you get rolling this, the harder it can be to hold. So just take your time and use some caution. Keep your fingers away from the edges of the metal. And just work slowly. If you need to kind of rest, I've definitely taken breaks. You don't want to let go of it with both hands, but if you feel your hands kind of cramping up or anything, you can kind of stop and rest for a second. But you do want to be careful with this step. So now that I'm at the end here, I'm going to peel off my paper tape, the paper backing from my tape, and I'm just going to continue rolling to seal off this bead. And you want your tape to wrap maybe one full time around the metal. So you can either remove this from the bead roller or leave it on the bead roller. I will show you this next step with it on the bead roller. But once you have this size and you have it taped off, you can kind of hold it on the ends and continue rolling if you prefer to do it that way. So I'm going to be making this first section into the head of the reindeer. So I'm going to take my Coca-Cola strips, and I've taped together with the clear tape the large taper and one of the small tapers. And now I'm just going to add some tape to the end and continue rolling it onto my bead. That's way too much. I haven't found the best way to work with this cellophane tape. It's definitely a little less user-friendly than the metal tape, but you don't obviously want to use the metal tape when you're working with the printed side. So I'm just going to trim this tape down so that it is the size of my coil here. And I'm just going to add it to the roll, keeping the tape as straight as possible. And I like to go ahead and just cut a piece of tape. I'm not going to put it on the end yet, but I am going to cut a piece of tape that is the same width as the end of my taper. Oops. And then just stick it to something you can grab it from easily. And I'm going to go ahead and just continue rolling, keeping the taper centered so that it kind of creates a little bit of a coil and a little bit of more dimension in the center of the roll here. And then when I get to the end, I can go ahead and grab my tape and finish off the bead. And then I can just carefully remove it from the bead roller. You probably have to wiggle it a little bit, and you can see that it's definitely caught on the end here. You can always push those pieces back together, but just don't let them pull out all the way. There we go. So here's what I mean. I can definitely kind of push those ends back in. And get those ends as flat as possible. So that is the finished bead that we're going to be using for the head. To make the coil for the body, you start the same way. So you're going to take your 6 rectangular pieces and roll them in a coil. And then I've already taped together with the clear tape the 3 tapers. So I've got two tapers with the large, middle, and small taper. And I'm going to go through the same process. I'm just going to put the tapers onto my coil with the clear tape, but I'm going to roll 2 of them at a time instead of just 1, and they have this longer piece on them. So this bead will be a little bit fatter than the other one. So I'm just going to take a little piece of my tape again. Trim it down so it doesn't overhang the silver coil. And you can see I've already removed this one from the bead roller, so I'll show you how you can carry on from here without having it on the bead roller. So I'm just going to tape that one on there, and then I'm going to take the next one and tape it just a little bit lower. Keep getting my tape way too long. You only need about 1.5 inches or so. So I'm just going to tape this one just a little bit away from the other one so they're not exactly on top of each other. So you can see they just have a little bit of separation there. And again, I want to go ahead and I want to cut a couple of pieces of tape, little thin strips to fit on the end of my tapers. You could put the tape on before you started rolling if you wanted to, but I've just found that it gets stuck on a lot of things and that can cause problems. So I like to just cut the pieces and sort of have them ready to grab so that I can grab them with one hand. So if you do remove your bead from the bead roller, you can just kind of hold it by the sides and roll your tapers around. So it's just kind of a personal preference. It can be a little bit harder to hold it this way, but you have a little bit more control over lining everything up. So however you prefer to do it. Just trying to keep my coils centered so that taper just kind of goes right in the middle here. And then as I get to the end, I'm just going to keep things lined up. Go ahead and add a piece of tape. Can be a little tricky to get it on there straight, but you don't want to let go of the coil. So once the tape's on there, just going to go ahead and roll the rest of this around and let it grab. And I kind of like to throw an extra piece of tape on there, so just pick up kind of where I think the tape left off and give it another wrap with the tape just to make sure that I've got those coils nice and secure. So here are the two different shapes. You can see that this one ends up a little bit fatter, and that makes the body of the reindeer. Now, because we have so much metal on here and I just have them taped together, I want to make sure that I have these very secure and that they're not going to ever come open. I want to go ahead and I'm going to put a little bit of E6000 glue on both ends. I'm going to avoid getting it in the opening, but I do want to kind of spread it around all of the coils. And you do need to allow this to set up a little bit before you flip it over and do the other side. And then this glue does take a full 36 hours, I think, to fully cure. So once this is a little set up, I'll flip these over and put some more E6000 on the other side. And once the glue has had time to cure, I'm going to go ahead and add a coat on the entire bead of this Mod Podge Super Gloss. I really like the Super Gloss because it's just extra thick and it puts a nice finish onto the beads. So here are a couple of the beads that I've made that have a couple of coats of the Mod Podge and the E6000 on the end. And I'm not sure if you can see on camera, but they're a little bit shinier and smoother, and they just have kind of a nice finish to them now. For this next step, you're going to need a pair of round-tipped jewelry pliers and some 20 gauge silver wire. So I've already cut my wire, and for this project you need one piece of wire that is 20 inches long, one piece of wire that is 13 inches long, two pieces at 11.5 inches long, and two pieces at 5 inches long. So I'm going to start with my 20-inch piece of wire and the roll-up that I'm using for the head. And I also need a small black button. You could probably use one with a little shank on the back. I have a 2-hole button here, which also works. You probably don't want to use a button with 4 holes just because it might not look right. But if you do have a shank on the back, you want to make sure that it kind of fits inside of the hole of your bead here. So probably the best choice of buttons is a 2-hole button, and you just want it to be a little bit smaller than the coil itself. So I'm going to take the 20-inch piece of wire and kind of just fold it in half. I don't want to crimp the fold really tightly, but I do want a little fold in it. And then I'm going to thread the ends of my wire through my button. And then you just want to pull that to the end, get it on there nice and tight. And then I'm going to thread the wires through my metal roll up here. And I want to pull it snug so that I've got that up tight against the metal. I'm going to bend the wires so they're at 90 degrees, and then I want to bend them flat against my metal roll here. And then I'm going to go 5/8 to 1/2 inch into the bead, put my finger and bend the wires back up. And from this point, I want to put some twist in the wire. So I'm going to hold that secure to the bead, and then I'm going to twist 6 or 7 times. And push my wires back together. So it should look something like this. So I'm ready to add my second bead. So I want to go ahead and thread my wires through the bead here. And this twisted part is going to form the neck of the reindeer. And you want to keep the head fairly close to the body. So it's kind of personal preference, but I'm just going to bend the twisted portion up so that I have a little bit of a gap between the 2 beads, but so that there isn't a terribly long section where the head is sticking up away from the body too much. So now I want to bend these wires down to kind of lock the wire in place. And these wires will form part of the back leg. So I'm going to take my 2 11.5 inch pieces of wire, and I'm going to thread them through the body bead. And I want them centered. So you're just going to have to kind of eyeball it, but you want an even amount of wire in the front and the back. And I'm just going to fold those down. So these are the wires that I just threaded through the back. I want to separate them and separate the other 2 wires that I already had in the back. And then I'm going to pair them up and twist the wires all the way to the end. So I'm just going to hold the wires that are in my way out of the way and go ahead and twist the 2 wires together all the way to the end. And then I'll take the second pair and just repeat that process. So at this point, your reindeer should look a little bit like this. The 2 back legs have the 2 wires that are twisted together, and you have 2 similarly lengthed pieces of wire that are not twisted. So I'm going to take my 13-inch piece of wire now, and I want to fold it in half again with sort of not a crimped fold, but a fairly tight fold at the center back end. And I want to thread my wires from the back to the front of the body bead, but I want to make sure that I'm catching the wire loop on something in the back so that it won't pull all the way through. So I'm just going to wrap it around one of the legs that I've twisted. So you can see it's kind of going over one of those legs. And then I'm going to push my wires through. This gets a little tight, so it might take a little extra effort to get them through. And then I'm just going to pull those tight. And you can see that there's a little bit of it's wrapped around that back leg to hold it in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and twist these front legs again, but I want to make sure that I get the wires paired up so that they're the two that I've just threaded through. I'm going to match one of those with one of the ones that were already threaded. And then I'm going to twist the pairs of wires together just like I did on the back legs. So the next step is to shape the legs. And the first thing I want to do is just trim off these wires that aren't coiled, because your wires aren't going to end up completely even. So I just want to go ahead and trim all the legs so that they're the same length. And you do want to keep them fairly long. So just trim off the portion of the wire that didn't get twisted together. They don't have to be perfect, but you want them to be fairly close to the same length. And then I like to kind of separate the legs a little bit. You can straighten them out a hair. I think they look kind of cute if they're a little bit wobbly. So I'm going to spread them out a little bit, and then I want to bend them back underneath the body a little bit so that they're not coming straight out of the bead portion. So I'm just going to make sort of a double bend in the wire about 1/4 of an inch underneath the bead. And I'll go ahead and do that on the back legs as well. And then I'm just going to use the barrel portion of my jewelry pliers to coil the legs up and make sort of hoofs or feet. And you can leave the legs kind of straight. You want to make sure that your coils are even so that your reindeer will stand up. But I kind of like to put bends in the legs and shape them a little bit. So that's a personal preference. But you can shape the legs any way you want to. Just make sure that your reindeer is still going to stand up on all fours. And next we're going to shape the antlers. So I'm going to take my two 5-inch pieces of 20 gauge wire, and I also have 12 6-inch pieces of 32 or 28 gauge wire. I have some of both and I honestly can't tell the difference, so it's pretty minute whatever the difference is between 32 gauge and 28 gauge. But you just want a very fine wire. And I'm going to take my 20 gauge pieces and just kind of fold them in half. And I like to fold them with one side shorter than the other. And for this piece, you do want to go ahead and get a nice tight crimp in the fold. So I'm going to use my pliers to pinch that fold tighter so that you've got kind of a hairpin shape. And then I'm going to make a series of bends in this metal. I'm going to start at the folded end, and if you want to, you can use the pliers. I just like to use my fingers, but I'm going to fold about 5/8 of an inch or 1/2 an inch at 90 degrees. I like to have the taller section in the middle and the shorter section on the outside, so I want to fold my other piece so that when your bends are folded, you have the shorter sections on the outside. So these slip into the back here. Like that. And then I'm going to take them and fold them straight down onto my coil. And again, I'm going to fold them back up at 90 degrees, about 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch onto the bead. So again, I'm just going to use my fingers and fold those wires back up so that they fit kind of back onto the bead a little bit. And now I can take them out, and I'm going to go ahead and add my smaller wires. So I have 12 of the 6-inch pieces of 32 gauge, and I'm going to take 6 of them for each antler. And again, I'm going to fold them so that they're a little bit uneven, so that I have a shorter and a longer side. So I want to take my 20 gauge wire and my small pieces of 32 gauge wire, and I'm just going to wrap the wire around the 20 gauge wire. So once you've gotten to the top of your 20 gauge wire, you can go ahead and start separating the 28 or 32 gauge wire and twist them in different configurations to make the little shaped portions of your antlers. So I usually take 2 wires and twist them together, not all the way to the end because I want to leave a little definition between the wires. And then I'll take 4 wires and twist them together and then separate them a little farther down the twisted portion. You could add more wires if you wanted to. It's just kind of personal preference at this point to twist the wires and shape the antlers to make them the shape that you want. So you just want to go ahead and repeat that process on your second pair of antlers. So once you have both pairs of antlers twisted, you can go ahead and attach them to the back of your reindeer. And to do that, I'm just going to take a little bit of E6000 glue again. And I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of E6000 in the hole of the coil and a little bit around the top edge. And then I can just slide the folded end into the hole. And press the wires into that glue. You can adjust the wires once the glue is dried, but you want to just make sure that they're kind of have the right placement for you on the top of the bead. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside and let the glue cure. So I have another reindeer here, and the glue is dry on the back of the antlers here, and you can see that you can kind of turn the head any way you like to. I think they're cute when they're looking kind of off to the side like this, so I have this one twisted. And what I want to do next is go ahead and put the eyes on. So for the eyes, I'm just using small straight pins with the black ball end of the pin. And I'm going to take 2 of them. And they're pretty easy to cut with the cutting portion of your pliers. So I just want to cut off most of the metal piece. I want to leave about 5/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. on each of my pins. And you might want a third pin or a little pointed skewer or something just to help you get these in place. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my E6000 glue again, and I just want to get some glue on the metal portion that's left on my pin. And then I'm going to slide it right under my antler. And you might want the pin just to make sure that the metal portion of the pin is lined up with the metal with your 20 gauge wire. So you just want to keep that underneath the antler so you don't have the back of the pin kind of sticking out. So I'm just going to do that again. And that first one went right in there. It stayed nicely, but if you do have your pin sticking out on the side, you can use another pin just to kind of slide that into position. So there are the eyes attached. And now I want to do a similar procedure to make the little tail in the back. And for that, I'm going to use a corsage pin. They're a little bit longer, and you can see they have this bigger head to them, but I'm going to cut the pin off in the same way. I'm going to leave a little bit more on here this time, maybe about 1 inch. And then I want to use my pliers to bend the wire to a 90-degree angle so that the little decorative portion is at a 90-degree angle of the wire now. And I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the wire again. And I'm going to slide that wire portion into the back of the bead. And I like to have the little tail sticking up, but you could have it off to the side or however you want it. So to finish off the reindeer, I'm going to be making these little Christmas ball decorations to hang on the antlers. You could certainly use some other decorative ideas. I've seen the little reindeer with hats on and snow and different things, but I'm going to be using these little Christmas balls. So to make these little Christmas balls, I'm just using some red foil from chocolate candy, so candy wrapper. And I've cut about 1 by 1 inch or 1.5 by 1.5 inch squares. And then I'm also going to be using about 1 inch length of my 28 or 32 gauge wire. And I just want to make a tiny, tiny little loop in this wire. And I'm going to just twist it a few times to close off that loop. And then I'm going to trim off most of this wire. I just want a tiny little hook piece, and this wire is so thin you should be able just to use a little pair of scissors. So you're left with just kind of a little corkscrew shape. And next I'm going to take one of my small pieces of foil, and I'm just going to kind of roll all of the edges in so that I have all of the colored portion out. And I'm going to start to form a little ball shape very loosely. So it's fairly large and loose right now. And then I'm going to place my wire inside there. And then I'm just going to pinch the foil down into a tight ball around the twisted part of my wire. And usually these stay right in there. If you need to add a tiny bit of glue, you can. I haven't really had to do that. Once you've really compressed that foil, it does kind of grab a hold and your wires tend to stay in place. So when you're done, you should have a fairly round shape with a little wire ring on it. And then you can go ahead and decorate the antlers. And I like to use a toothpick to add a little bit of E6000 glue to hold the little Christmas balls in place. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Share it with your friends if you think they'd enjoy it. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and join my YouTube community. Also, there's a place in the description box if you'd like to sign up to receive the Upcycled Design Lab newsletter. You can click one of the links below for more upcycling tutorials, or visit the Upcycled Design Lab to check out more content. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you back here soon in the lab for my next experiment.